Hello everyone, and welcome to this demonstration of the Redfig Partnerflow. Today we will demo one of our most popular scenarios, which is the vendor registration. This scenario does come pre-delivered as a template with Redfig Partnerflow, but you do have the option to customize it based on the requirements of your organization. If you're not familiar with Redfig Partnerflow and would like to learn more, you can always visit our website at partnerflow.com to schedule a private demo, explore additional use cases, or access other helpful content. This scenario is a simple 5-step vendor registration workflow. The first step is completed by the requester. This is the person who initiates the workflow. It could be any employee in the organization who has identified a new vendor that they would like to start doing business with. The second step is completed by the vendor themselves. Now, in most companies, this would typically require the vendor to correspond with someone internally and send their information via email. However, we'll show you how the Redfig Partnerflow can automatically provision temporary access to external users so they can just provide their information directly on the platform. The third step is completed by a purchasing analyst. This is someone that is familiar with SAP terminology and can fill out specific SAP data. The fourth step is a simple approval step by the purchasing director. For this demo, we'll see how that can be done from a mobile device. Finally, someone from finance provides the financial information and performs the final validations before the vendor is created in SAP. Now let's dive into the demo. For the first part of the demo, I'll play the role of the requester. Again, this could be anyone in your organization that has access to request a new vendor. After I log into the Redfig Partnerflow, I land on this central launchpad. On the launchpad, there are some analytical tools available for managers to monitor the overall effectiveness of their partner onboarding process. Towards the bottom, there are also some tiles that can be used by IT administrators to configure and monitor the solution from a more technical perspective. These features will all be covered in a different video. Today we'll be focusing on the basic functions. So I'll go ahead and click on the tile labeled New BP Request to initiate my workflow. Once I click on the tile, the app will guide me through a few easy steps in order to initiate the request. First, I'll select the scenario, which in our case is the new vendor request. Next, I'll click on the relevant business unit. A business unit corresponds to a set of organizations in SAP such as purchase orgs, sales orgs, and company codes. Finally, I'll select the type of vendor, which simply corresponds to account groups in SAP. Once these fields are selected, the app will give me a preview of which organizations are relevant for this business partner, and whether or not those are required. Again, this is all configurable through the config cockpit. On the second screen, I'll enter the name of my vendor and the information for my main contact at that vendor. This will be the person who will receive a request from the workflow application to provide their information on behalf of the vendor. Next, I'll put in a brief description as to why I need this vendor created. This is just a useful bit of information that other participants of the workflow can view throughout the process. And that's it for this step. Now let's switch over to the vendor view. For the second step of this workflow, I'll play the role of the vendor. So as a vendor, I'll receive an email notification indicating that I've been invited to register as a vendor at Redfig. This email will contain my username, a temporary password, and a link for me to log into the Redfig Partnerflow. Once I log in, I'm brought straight to the form where I can fill out my information. And you can see I'm logged in as the vendor. And when I look at the information, I can see that some of it has already been filled out for me, but I can edit some of it if I need to. I will then enter my address. And I can also add additional addresses. For example, if I want to add an address for a warehouse location, next, I can add some additional context for my company. I also have the option of adding bank accounts. As a vendor, naturally, I would like to get paid. So I'll go ahead and click on the Add Bank button. I'll pick my bank country. In the US, we mainly deal with routing numbers, so I'll go ahead and type that in. The app does have data validation built in, and in this case, it does recognize my bank based on the routing number that I typed in. So I'll then fill out the rest of the fields and hit save. Next, I can add attachments. In the US, it's typical for vendors to provide a W-9 form. Other countries may have other requirements. Finally, I can enter some comments and submit my form. And that's it for the vendor. Next, we'll look at the role of the purchasing analyst. For the third step of this demo, I'll play the role of the purchasing analyst. As always, I'll receive an email notification indicating that I have a task that requires my attention. This email notification will contain a link that will navigate me directly into the task. You can see that I'm now logged into the Redfig Partnerflow as a purchasing analyst. And this is the first time we get an internal view of what the vendor request form looks like. At the top, you'll see some details regarding the workflow request. And on the timeline, you can see exactly the steps that are required for this workflow and who's expected to perform each step. You can also see who completed each step and when. Scrolling down, you can see some of the data that was filled out by the vendor. However, you also see some new fields that start to resemble some of the fields you may be familiar with from SAP. This is where the purchasing analyst starts providing their information. For example, I can select the language that we would like to communicate with this vendor. I can also see the address and the contact information provided by the vendor. And then down by the vendor section, I see the fields that are specific to the purchasing organization in SAP. Which fields are shown here is completely customizable through the config cockpit with no coding required. All drop-down values come from SAP, so the data validation is built in at the time of entry. If I want to, I can also review the attachment that was provided by the vendor. And I can also add a comment of my own. Before I submit, we'll take a quick look at the log here where I can see the previous comments. And for this step, we do have the ability to reject. This is where I have the ability to send this request back to the vendor. However, for now, I'll just approve the request and let it go to the next step. And it looks like I missed a field. As you can see in the error message, it looks like I forgot to put in the search term, which I've configured to be a required field for this scenario. So I'll go ahead and find that field. And this time I should be able to approve. And that's just another example of how upfront data validation can help us keep our master data clean. And that's it for this step. For the next step, we'll see how this looks like from the purchasing approval perspective. For the last step of the workflow, I'll play the role of the finance manager. When I log into the Launchpad, I can see that I have a task that requires my attention, so I'll click into it. And in the form, I can see that in the timeline, I'm the last step of the workflow. I can also view all the data that was entered before me, but for this step, I don't have access to edit most of it. However, I can edit the company code data under the accounts payable section. The required fields are the reconciliation account, the payment terms, and the payment method. For this vendor, since they did provide a bank account, I'll go ahead and select bank transfer as the payment method. Finally, I'll add some comments. Before I hit approve, I can see that I actually have two options for rejection. That is because in the config cockpit, we've configured this step to allow a rejection to two other previous steps. I can either reject it back to the vendor, or I can reject it back to purchasing. And this will depend on the reason that I'm rejecting and what data might be missing from the request. However, I'm okay with this request, so for now, I'll just go ahead and approve. Finally, I'll go into SAP to make sure the vendor was created correctly. This isn't typically a necessary step, but I'll do it for the purposes of this demo. I can see that my vendor's there. I was given the appropriate roles, and my attachment was correctly brought into SAP. And that's it for today's demo. Remember, for more information, you can always visit our website at partnerflow.com. Thank you for watching.